A while back, I did an evolution of a tank with the Guppy Mansion, and showed some past footage of the tank when I first planted it, how it had grown in over time, and how the plants had kind of naturally changed the dynamic of the tank by me just letting nature do its thing. I wanted to do the same thing for another tank. Fallen Forest. Some quick history on this tank, and then we'll get into footage and show you over time how this tank has changed. For those who are new, or maybe you just don't remember, this tank was kind of a project between my wife and I. My wife was given the hard task of telling me where to put all the hardscape. So the aquascaping of this tank, which now with how grown in it is almost hard to see, was done basically exclusively by my wife, with me just picking up things and putting them in place based on what she liked, and then adjusting and all that kind of stuff. So afterward, I planted the tank. And as you can see, I mean, I've got some extra stuff in here, don't get me wrong. There's like pots of stuff that are being saved for some other tanks and things like that, but I kind of always do that with some of my tanks. And this tank gets a good combination of CO2 and light, so I do that here. What do you do, right? But over time, there's certain plants that have like really come to the front that originally I was trying to leave the front a little more open, and then as they grew in, I kind of just liked it. Let's take a little quiet look, and I will kind of voice over and explain some of the things that are going on from the initial planting all the way through today and how the tank is now, and give you a little closer look of how the tank looks.
So here we are initially looking at the tank about 5 months after I planted it, and you can see there was stems in this tank at one point, and none of the Anubias was nearly grown in, and I really want to focus on that Anubias. And of course the lilies were looking fantastic. They were probably the most impressive thing in the entire aquarium, and you could see significantly more of the overall hardscape. I really love the particular stem that's in here, and it'll probably be one that I get again in a different tank, but I love the kind of epiphyte, and you can even see there's some hair algae as this is really settling in. And I think one of the other things that's important here is the fish looked dynamite, right? The greens and the reds really help these upper Tor rivers pop, and yeah, it's definitely something I want to fix again, because there are parts of this tank that looked really, really wonderful, even though this was nowhere near mature growth. But for 5 months, it was looking really, really good. Now, this is right after we did a massive maintenance to this tank, and it was a little over a year old at this point. And you gotta see me pointing some things out, but the crypts have really grown in. They looked a lot better. We had planted the Jacobsonite pink, and they were starting to come in. But some of the other changes were just the density of some of the plants in certain places. Quite a bit of the Anubias has started to grow in and take over certain portions of the hardscape. But at this point, the front of the tank was still relatively cleaned up and kept free. You can see this just amazing color on some of the Jacobsonite pink in the back. And then some of the things like that Boos black pearl right there just looks lights out and stellar. It's still there, but it's other things have grown in, and you'll see that in a minute. But all that just beautiful deep reds and oranges that come from the Jacobsonite pink. There's this beautiful green from the crypts in the back between the Axelrodi and the Lutea. You see that little touch of Java Fern. And then our Anubias that's there on the main piece of wood on the far right-hand side. Compared to now, this is just a touch over 2 years, and you'll notice, right, we don't have any more of the Nymphaea in the background. The crypts are just totally taking over this incredible jungle of crypts in the back. But you can see from this top down, the Anubias just has grown over that entire piece of wood over 2 years. And even some of the Anubiases that were more controlled on the left-hand side of the tank have really spread their way around to a point where they're kind of shading out some of the Boos, and some of the Boos is kind of like struggling some. So I have to go actually make some trims there. But just, you can see the density of the growth over 2 years. And this is one of the things that I think if you keep a tank for more than 6 months, you start to get into. There's just so many things that will surprise you about how a plant can grow if you go back and look at your tank originally compared to a year later, 2 years later, and what nature can do. Now, obviously, there's a few less fish. I've had some struggles there, but not due to illness, due to a few things between heat waves and things like that. So eventually I've got to kind of repopulate this tank, but I really love the way this has grown in, and I hope you've enjoyed this little evolution too.
What do you think? Do you miss the lilies that used to be in the tank? Are you kind of like me, where you're just astonished at how well the Anubias has grown on the the right side of the tank? Or do you think it looked better in a different way, different past? Is there something that was more interesting about it to you? I want to hear in the comments down below. Me personally, I do kind of miss the lilies, but I love the way that the crypts have kind of brought this rainbow of color, where we have the Jacobsonite pink giving us some pinkish reddish tones. We have the Lutea that's in there, and there's a little bit of Axelrodi giving us some nice mixture of bright and darker green tones. There's a couple of different Anubias types in there. Some of the boost is really hard to see because it's basically hidden under all the other stuff, but it's in there. And I've really enjoyed watching this tank grow. And one thing I find really funky, and there is a shot of it, and I'll put it back up now, but over here in this piece of wood, somehow one of the crypts, and I'm pretty confident that's an Axelrodi, just looking at it, one of the crypt Axelrodi found a way to crawl up and grow out of the wood. It's not actually in the substrate. It is growing straight out of that wood. So I think that's kind of cool. It looks, at first glance, you'll not even notice it. But when you look close, you're like, that's a crypt coming out. That's not a normal epiphyte. Huh. Little surprises like that in this tank. Just because it has a nice amount of driftwood. So lots of things have been able to kind of change their course of life and let nature do its thing. One of my favorite things to do, let nature do its thing. I hope you've enjoyed this little video. As a reminder, my wife has surgery coming up quite literally next week. I'm hoping to keep my normal cadence of videos, but there is a chance that we miss a video or two as my wife is going through, especially her initial recovery. So forgive me for that. I'm still hoping to keep some amount of content coming. It might be a little shorter. We definitely will keep up with the Algae Buster Challenge over here through shorts, so you'll get a weekly update at a minimum there on this Algae Doomsday Project. I can actually see some of the SAEs working in the back. Yeah. But I want to thank you all so much. This community has always been so wonderful. And I know there are certain things I want to get out and get done in other projects, but I'm hoping that we can get a lot of really cool stuff going as we get in toward the summer before the great hot time where none of us necessarily want to be cooped up inside. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching. And stay awesome.